Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward, Chapter 83. Aching with hunger, I followed numbly after Eve's retreating footsteps. I had held her hand linked in mine at first, but she sprung forward with an easy step, filled with seemingly endless energy. We continued down a darkened corridor. The echoes of reflected light had since ceased after we passed a high-arched doorway that was cut into the very bedrock. The immense opening must be 60 spans or more across, perhaps hundreds of spans in height. I was worried that our path would take us deeper into the earth. I had long since felt a steady rumble of hunger low in the pit of my stomach. The image I had seen had terrified me. What did it mean? Was it some future that would come to pass, or just possibility? I wanted to cast the vision out as simple madness. Who can say if what I saw was any more than a drug-induced hallucination? Perhaps I had come in contact with one of the glistening pools of moon silver without realizing it. Who knew what strange properties it held? I had no desire to repeat the ordeal. The murals had slowly disappeared as we went farther into the gloom. The heat under the soles of my feet had increased to just above a pleasant warmth. It was insistent, like the heat of a flickering tallow that fought to stay lit in the wind. My feet felt the clammy earth. A mossy feel gave way to the strange stones that surged and beaded with condensation. They were warm to the touch and gave the barest glow in the darkness. The riveting murals may have continued above us. I would never know without a source of light, to be sure. Eve came back into my tiny field of vision. I could barely make out the features of her face. She grinned a wide smile, bubbling with excitement. "They are close now. Come, Eddie. You will not need to wait much longer." She reached out to me, wrapping her arms about me gleefully. She held me there a moment. I could feel the beat of her heart against my skin. I was beginning to lose hope. Hunger pangs aside, I worried how long I could endure without water, light, or nourishment. I huddled against Eve, taking shelter from the cold air that swirled around us from an unseen source. We were walking down, not up. "Eve, I don't know how much longer I can go on. I'm hungry and thirsty and almost blind. If I lose you again down here, I would surely be lost. Please, is there a way up to the surface? I want to see the sun again, to feel the air on my face. I'm worried we will die underground. I'm sorry." I felt guilty and scared, not wanting to disappoint her. I felt weary, like an old man. I closed my eyes for a moment, just standing there, holding on to Eve, not wanting to let her go. I felt sick. The anger and fear and loathing of my short life wound up into me then. It threatened to spill over. I could not wait for an answer. I wanted to know now. To meet the elders Eve hinted at. I was worried what I might see. I wasn't ready, I knew. My mouth felt incredibly dry, like a coffin full of dust. I held Eve close to me for a moment and rocked back and forth, pressing out sound and every other sense but the feel of her, the wondrous feel of warmth and compassion that was there for me. I felt her pull me tighter and I relaxed, taking in the warmth heartily, like a starving child. I couldn't lose her. I couldn't lose human touch again. The deathly calm tomb that we stood in was massive and terrible and cold. It was hellish. The silence was palpable, tremors of heat pressing through our shoes at odd intervals. "Take me onward, Eve. I trust you." My voice felt like such a small thing, hovering on the edge of nothing at the rim of my vision. My sense of self pushed inward, almost crushing me flat against the barren floor of the Titanic chamber. I was ready to hear the answer, whatever it may be. I had already thought of every possible answer I could conceive in my mind. I knew that my mind could be broken, leaving me to wander like the poor wretches I had seen as a child, unable to care for themselves. I was ready. I would not give in to fear. I clenched my hand and felt a solemn mask slide over my features. I had already seen death there. I knew what I feared most. I followed Eve as we continued the downward slope in the darkness of the tunnel. I listened intently to the strange popping noises that came from the small stones we trod upon amid our descent. They flashed briefly in the darkness whenever we placed weight on them, sending tiny red sparks with each step. They flickered like tiny fireflies, scattering on the wind to our touch. Eve breathed short, quick breaths as she pulled me on, yearning to reach our destination. I watched her move in the half-hidden bursts of light and shadow that painted her features when the sparks broke the silence. I could see the curve of her waist, the shimmering silver hair that fell in rolling waves down the length of her back, seeming alive in the dimness. "Eddie, will you leave us?" Eve barely whispered the question, so faint it was to my ears. She stopped for a moment and waited on my response, the flickering shadows extending until the sparks disappeared completely. I felt the vacuum all around me, stillness beyond anything I had experienced so far beneath the earth. I searched in the darkness for her hand, bumbling around for a moment before I found her. I tried to express warmth through the bond our hands made. "I don't want to leave you, Eve. I know you are not of our people, but I think you are beautiful. To me, you are wondrous." I said it with as much heat as I could muster, wanting her to believe. I was afraid. Part of me wanted to stay here with her, the darkness be damned. Part of me didn't care. But I wasn't sure I could survive in this strange city. Another painful wave of hunger struck me, bringing with it a dull headache that would eventually extend throughout my chest and limbs. "You would take me with you?" Eve asked quietly, waiting on my response. "Yes," I breathed, wanting to believe what I heard was real. "I am not of your people. I am afraid, Eddie. None of our people have ever returned from our city after leaving. I have seen lives end. She faltered, not speaking for a space of breaths. "I would honor you, Eddie, as a traveler to our city. I do not know if I can do more. I'm sorry." I could hear Eve wiping her hand against her skin before she turned away from me. I couldn't see anything in the complete darkness that surrounded us. "Don't worry, Eve. I will leave the city once we reach the surface." I could not blame her. She was only meant as my guide. But I wanted more. I couldn't stop my feelings. She wasn't even human for all I could tell. I didn't care. Not a whit. Eve squeezed my hand, feeling the intense quiet that had fallen between us. I could hear the intake of her breath, soft and quick. "Eddie, I am only a messenger of my people. The fire you have shown us is wonderful. You are strong. I am so happy to have been able to guide you this far." Our steps resumed, and the sparks that flew from the strange rocks beneath us illuminated her face enough for me to see her smiling, her eyes pools of molten amber that were alive and joyous. There was a feeling of turning as our path wended downwards. It felt as if we had been walking in circles. I could hear a pounding thrum. It was soft, but felt like the rowing noise of dozens of hands pulling against the great cavern, shifting us ever so gradually. I felt another shift. The pounding increased. I felt it through my body. It reverberated as the sharp stab of hunger hit me again. I put an arm out to feel the wall next to us. It was slowly revolving, twisting like an axis. How? "Eve, where are we? Where are you taking us?" My voice quavered in the dark, and she stopped beside me, going utterly still. "Eddie, we must not leave this chamber yet. Your mind could not withstand what you saw. I am preparing the way. I had hoped you would not ask this of me. It is a secret thing, dangerous knowledge for me to share. Eddie, do not ask me where we are. Please." Her voice was kind and rang of truth. There was an undercurrent of emotion through her voice that was just below the surface. I could not tell what it was. I wanted to listen, but my body demanded answers. Now! I pressed more firmly against the wall, and I felt it pulse back to me, the warmth filling my arm the longer I held contact. The feeling of shifting continued on the edges of my senses. Holding my breath, I broke from Eve's grasp and ran madly forward. "No!" Eve shrieked. Her voice pained and ragged. The sounds of her fell away as I rushed onward, stumbling and running at full force. I could hear breathing of something around me, large and echoing. The path spun wildly, down and down. I felt metal against my palm the next time I touched the wall. A great sound was being reverberated through the walls, powerful and all-encompassing. My outflung arms hit solid metal and I stopped abruptly, running headlong into a giant metallic wall. The pressure was intense on my head and extremities. I screamed as it pressed on me further. The gonging resolved into something greater. Agony ripped through me as I struggled against the beating sound. And then something broke open. A blazing line of light appeared, slicing the darkness like a bar of fire, hundreds of spans high. In mute shock, I realized it was sunlight.